Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you very much for being here today. My name is Omar. I'm a host
What's
here
up,
at.
everyone? Thank you so much for being here today.
We
My name
got.
is Omar.
Okay, there we go. We don't want to have the same start as we did with Frank Jacob. Hey,
No, no.
what's up, everyone? Omar here from Watchers Talk, coming at you guys from West Coast, British Columbia, Canada, with my co-host, Dr. Joan of Angels, and this Sega continues here on Watchers Talk with the Looking Glass, and it has been a very interesting week so far, and it's going to get even interesting today. We're going to go really deep, and we're going to understand this at a much, much, much deeper level with our guest, Brad Olsen. You guys probably know him, and if you don't, then I'm not sure what to say. But Brad is like all over the place, just canceling everything everywhere. And I love it. Brad's amazing. We've done lots of work together over the last couple of years. Dr. Joan, welcome. Thank you very much for helping co-host this talk here today on Project Looking Glass.
My favorite subject is timelines and altering them and looking into the future. So and Brad Olsen's become one of my favorite subjects ever since I saw him in person and got his book.
Ooh,
so
nice. Let's put you on full screen for that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll give a little plug for this great book for Brad Olsen. It is a great resource for all things metaphysical, esoteric, conspiracy, anything you wanted to know about anything that's not in mainstream.
Yeah, I read it, and Brad and I we actually did a talk a few months ago on what was that, geoengineering, HARP, and CERN, and weather modification. It was an epic talk. You guys, if you want to check that out, go into the videos. It was incredible. I love those books. And I created an intention, Dr. Joan, like back in what was that, like October, and I'm still holding on to that intention. And the intention is that somehow, some way, the universe is going to give me the esoteric series, all three of them. And I keep telling my wife that, and it's like, and I have that intention every day. I think about it, and literally, I'm, because I want to see how it's going to come to fruition, because I know it will. I just want to see how it's going to happen. So that's like one of my ongoing intentions, and I think I've told Rob that a number of times from Full Spectrum Universe. So it's cool that you have it.
Had I known that you wanted this book, and Brad was on the event we had that morning, and I said on there I was going to see him at the conference. Yeah. You could have said, "Joan, get me his book."
Oh, I should have the whole series. Hey, let me bring Brad on. Hello, Brad. Welcome, my brother. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. And you guys are so kind. Thanks for the nice words. I was almost a little bit late today because I was getting some reverse osmosis water in New Leaf supermarket. And there's this guy just staring at me. I'm like, what, am I taking too long filling up here? Think he's going to get mad at me. He's like, I know you from those videos. Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of weird. People are starting to recognize me now. I kind of like being anonymous, but not always so easy. But
in this new timeline and this new age we're going into, Brad, you're like, like one of the foremost teachers that's like really out there and sharing his knowledge and wisdom and the thing that you've uncovered and learned and raised your awareness on, and you're sharing that with people every single day. Like, how many shows do you do a day? Like 2, 3, 4 shows a day, and then like 20 conferences a month. You're incredible, bro.
Yeah, I guess I'm getting to be in high demand, and that's a good thing. I enjoy talking to great people like you guys, and hey, we're all about enlightening the masses and getting this information out there. And for my small part, I'm very honored to have a role in all this. The Great Awakening is the greatest time to be alive, and we're seeing it happening in real time, and we're all at the prime of our lives. So I don't think there's any coincidence that it should be happening right now when we're in a position to be able to be a part of that Great Awakening.
We were born for it. That's what I think.
Yeah. Raised our hands. I'm in.
Bring me in. I need an adventure. Planet Earth. Let's do it.
I'm in the middle of the river, just floating along and raising my awareness as much as I possibly can, wherever I can, and applying that into my life. It's one thing to learn all this stuff, but it's another to attempt to incorporate that into your life, and it's very tough, right? Because you lose friends and family, and people turn on you, look at you weird, but that's part of the game, and if it weren't for that, we won't recognize the good, right? And I think that's it's the journey is sometimes more important than the actual outcome, I think. It's like reading Brad's books. You just want to keep reading them and wish they never end.
You know, the funniest thing about the book is it looks like someone's already read it already with the way you've done it. I keep thinking, did I read this page already? It's like in my brain. Well, this is really exciting times that we're in, and I'm really curious to hear your perspective, Brad, about the Guardians and the timeline and what's going on.
Yeah, and let's while you're doing that, Brad, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what's happened yesterday with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, and how really that falls into the timelines and what the Guardians are saying. I'd like to hear that. That'd be pretty cool. So let me put you on full screen, and then once you give us a short download, and then we'll talk about it.
Well, it's funny that Joan and I were both at the Sedona conference last month, and we were on with you, Omar, right before we met each other in person. It was such a synchronicity for that to happen, and just Joan and I really hit it off from the time we were on your show, and that she's so very interested and knowledgeable about the timelines, and I think this has to be discussed on any talk that we do pertaining to looking glass technology or Stargates, because the timelines are very, very important. And Carrie Cassidy's even described it as the timeline wars, that there is such an immense amount of attention, resources, different agendas at play here, not just human agendas to see us through to timeline 1, which is the golden age, but there have been others that have tried to game the system to get us onto timeline 2, which is a disaster for the planet and drops us into a level of fascism and anarchy and just destruction of the planet that would just be terrible for everyone. But the globalists who have had access to the looking glass technology were trying to do that. And Carrie Cassidy's interviews with Andrew, or not Andrew Passaggio, but Wood, forgot his first name, but he was tasked to try to backward engineer and look at how this yellow cube device, this looking glass technology, could be used to game the system for timeline 2 for some reason. Maybe they wanted to just get cover for their crimes, but they kept saying we need these outcomes to happen. And Bill Wood, that's his first name, would keep saying that we tried to do it, it didn't work out, and then they said we'll try it again this way. But you got to understand, using this technology, looking into the future is nothing but a series of probabilities. And this is what Bill Wood was coming up against, that they would get so far as to make one probability look like it was going to come true, but then something else would come and block it in the way. Because really the timeline is like a river flowing. It just wants to go in the direction it will. And so what they were trying to do is divert the river, create a little off stream and get the timeline flowing in that direction. And they couldn't get the full brunt of the river to go that way. And so in many ways it failed. But what I found really interesting, and they did these interviews probably about 20 years ago, that Bill Wood was saying that there was this singularity event that was coming up. And that was in 2012, that date we all heard of, that we were leading up to, December 21st, 2012, that timelines would merge at that point. And it's also interesting that in 2012 was the Summer Olympics in London. That was right before that December 21st date in the summer. And it was, if you watch, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have seen the videos of the opening ceremony at the Olympics, and they are doing predictive programming by making all these beds and showing what looked like a pandemic and kids in the hospital beds and this great big Grim Reaper puppet overseeing it all. And then that London stadium has all these triangles, like the Illuminati triangle everywhere. It was just so creepy. But that was the year that there was supposed to be a big false flag attack that did not happen. And so this is what's really interesting. And we're going to get into the Guardians of the Looking Glass, how they're pre-announcing other events that are trying to be implemented in order to get us into this timeline 2 scenario still. And this is going to continue until 2030. So there are a lot of things that we all need to be aware of to prevent these disasters and false flags and other negative events from happening. Just by knowing that they're coming is our greatest way of preventing them from happening. So that's my very strong interest in all of this. And of course, the yellow cube is featured on my latest book, Beyond Esoteric: Escaping Prison Planet.
That's the time machine right here.
That's the yellow cube. You keep fading in and out, Joan. Going through a Stargate
timeline. Just like the timeline. So, right. So the point is that as we talk about it, and the more we actually talk about it and put it out there, especially with higher vibrational frequencies, not of fear, but of, okay, now what? Like that could dissipate it. The energy about it is what what we're really finding out, right? So this timeline is really interesting. It's still, the event itself is fixed, but the timeline itself is still wobbling.
Right. And crossing over different paths. And it's my speculation that this is what the Mandela effect is all about. When you have the crossing of the timelines, then you get these little artifacts that remain. And all of us from the time we were kids remember Snow White, the evil witch, saying, "Mirror, mirror on the wall." Well, if you look at it now, it's "Mirror, mirror in the wall." And it's just these little things, the way the Bernstein Bears was spelled. And of course, some people remember Nelson Mandela's funeral before he was president of South Africa, and that's where it got the name. So it's these little artifacts that stick around, and it's like we're living through both timelines. So this is what's really interesting to me, is that we will have a bit of a memory of the time when we lived through that. It's almost like our doppelganger, or our a life in a parallel universe, that in a way we already know what the outcome is going to be, but we got to live through it again. So, for example, Alex Collier, he has been an Andromedan contactee for many, many years, since he was a child, basically. And I got the great opportunity of meeting him and questioning one-on-one and talking to him last summer at the Mount Shasta Summer Conference. And he'll be there again this year. And he was saying that the Andromedans said that there was going to be a great tyranny that was coming out of this sector of the universe. And they pinpointed it to Earth. And they also pinpointed it to 9/11. That's when it all began. And of course, we all know there's so many inconsistencies with 9/11, how that was one big false flag, but it also set up things like Homeland Security and the Patriot Act, and started to eviscerate our constitutional rights in this country. So we can see in retrospect that this is already happening. And then building upon that kind of tyranny and breaking down the structure in this country, how it's going to lead more and more and more. And then when we get into transhumanism and we get into what they're doing with these things and what's being injected into us in nanobot form and other things, that we would be leading into, even our bodies would be going into this, to the point where maybe we wouldn't even have a chance to even stand up and object anymore. So what the Andromedians told Alex Collier is that after 9/11 happened in the timeline and what we're in right now, that they were going to come back in time. They're time travelers. And this is something else about looking glass technology that's so fascinating, is it is time travel, as well as Stargate and portaling to different places in the universe. But you can also go back and forward in time. But there's a lot of consequences if you misbehave, let's say, going back in time. That's the whole grandfather paradox. If you went back in time and killed your grandfather, well, you couldn't exist in the future. Therefore, you get stuck in the timeline where your grandfather was. But Alex Collier said that they had to come back. Well, first the Andromedians made an appeal to the Galactic Federation and said, look, this planet is taken over by the reptilians. They're going to be a real menace around the solar system. It's going to be like that movie Avatar, where our corporation will just go to any planet and exploit it and tear it down for their own good. And we're going to lose our heart, our connection to the divine. And that's part of what this whole transhumanist agenda is all about too. So the Andromedians narrowly passed the edict to help out Earth. There were a lot of benevolent ET groups that just say, hey, we're hands off. We don't want to get involved. But narrowly passed with the support of other benevolent ET groups like the Pleiadians and Syrians and Arcturians and so forth, that have a connection to Earth. And maybe quite a few of their souls are also here as well. So they came back in time. And that's why I brought up the Summer Olympics false flag event that didn't happen. So they prevented a whole bunch of these events from happening and are still doing it. And also giving support to the white hat groups, the Alliance, who is now striving very hard to keep us on timeline one track. So this is very well known to the intelligence agencies, both black hat and white hat. So that's why it's the timeline wars, because each side is trying very hard to make their timeline come true. But it looks like we now have the upper hand. But what's so curious or interesting to me is that if we have already gone into this major tyranny and the Andromedians knew about it, that we will also have a memory of it and then not happening, but we'll know the outcome is going to be terrible, and therefore we're even more motivated to prevent it from happening. So many little nuances in all of this, but certainly the timelines and what is going to come, and basically the human race going right to the brink. And right about that point, boom, we break the back of the cabal. They no longer have their influence anymore, and then we can get on with it and enjoy this 1,000 years of peace into this golden age.
I don't know. Remember, I talked about this novel that doesn't end. You know, the end of the story. 10 years is, well, 8 years is a long time, taking us to the brink.
Yeah, look what's happened from 2012 to 2020, right?
Yeah.
Like really, that's a long period, and a lot of things happened during that time. So it is a long ways between here and there. And it seems that these guys know about it, because there's Agenda 2030, Agenda 21, like all of that is like connected, right? So it seems that they're aware of this. And I just wonder if like the Georgia Guidestones and things like that they've placed in this policy that they've been pushing forward for, since 2001, is somehow connected, right, to creating this timeline too. Because what I'm understanding, timeline one seems to be like this master timeline that we're on, and then they're trying to create something different with this timeline two. right? It's am I going somewhere with that, Brad? It's like, is that
Well, maybe we should define our terms a little better. Each one of us has our own timeline. So what are there, 7 billion people on the planet? So there are literally billions of different timelines. But when I talk about timeline 1 and timeline 2, that is the greater majority of humanity who also want to see this golden age become a reality. They don't want to see the planet destroyed. They don't want to go into World War 3, 4, and 5, and however worse it gets, and some humans going underground. This is already happening. See, then this brings in the alien question too, because they have agendas that need to be met, timelines that need to be met for their very existence. For example, some of the tall grays who are also coming back in time, making sure that their genetic experiments in which they become a new species, a human 2.0 really, have to occur during this time, or else they too, they're like the grandfather paradox. They will just go poof out of existence. So they are also coming back in time to make sure that their agenda is met, and that that the humans that are part of their experiment will become their ancestors in many ways. So it's very convoluted, and there's a lot of different influences in many directions. But that's just what makes it even more fascinating.
But isn't the 2030 event kind of more of a fixed outcome? How it goes, I mean, it's a fixed event that it isn't actually on a timeline in a sense, right? It is fixed. They've been saying that everything converges to this 2030 event. But how we experience it, how we experience it is going to be dependent on whether we were on the ascension type timeline or we had allowed this other timeline. Do you think we'll have indications? You say we're winning. Tell us what tells us we're winning. We need that.
Sure, yeah, we do need that. Yeah, and that's a great question, Joan. But just to also spotlight 2030, it's Ray Kurzweil, who is this big transhumanist guy. And he also says by 2030, that is when machines and AI is going to surpass the human mind. So another milestone on the road here. But how we know we're winning, Joan, is that a lot of these false flag attacks are being prevented and not happening. And we're not going to war, and we haven't gone to war with Russia. And a lot of things that were supposed to happen with a Hillary Clinton presidency, remember, they never thought she'd lose, because on timeline 2, that disaster scenario, she did win. And then there was a nuclear bomb that goes off in Seattle. You wouldn't even be here right now with us, Omar. And Joan, you and I would be in FEMA camps. I'm sure of it. And programs like this would not be even able to air. So that's one way of knowing that we're winning. But the very first timeline event that the Guardians of the Looking Glass predicted was in mid-April in New York City. And what happened? There was this guy with the gas mask, and he shot 29 people. Fortunately, none of them died. It could have been much, much, much worse. And of course, it would have been blamed on the Russians or whoever the false flag of the du jour would choose to be the new enemy. And of course, we got to rally together and go after them. I mean, it's typical
problem reaction.
Sorry, what's that?
The problem.
That typical problem reaction solution kind of thing, right?
Interesting.
But I just think, there's so many of us that are waking up to this right now that you have got this great little meme in Beyond Esoteric that their false flags are not working anymore because we're just awakening. We're seeing right through it. So it's kind of like that old saying from Abraham Lincoln: fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll just keep going on and on and on. So there has to be a time when we wake up to this. And so I love this one: how to spot a false flag. Immediate national news coverage, which you got with that New York City shooter, right? Mm-hmm. But when the whole thing didn't really work out, notice how quickly that dropped from the news cycle.
Yeah.
It's just gone. Okay, political agenda. Incident inspires intense emotions, right? They're shooting up our subway. What are we going to do about it? And initial media stories conflict the official story. We saw that on 9/11. No one's allowed to see the dead bodies. Similar drills held nearby. All of them had drills going on. 9/11, Sandy Hook, the Boston bombing.
That's a
And the
good sign.
mainstream media manipulation tactics, and then the federal government puts their attention right on this, and then the news media spotlight right on this, but doesn't tell you other things that are very, very important.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me go back here. It's really interesting. You brought up Hillary Clinton's presidency, and I'm wondering that, if this current presidency is somehow connected to that previous plan, but it failed because of 45. And then this one, they're trying to create like another timeline, trying to replicate something that they would have with Clinton.
Well, I think this one with China Joe, you can see how fake everything is. You've seen the green screen, like you, Joan of Angels, just fade in and out, and there's just so much fakery.
But I'm an angel. I'm allowed.
Yeah, yes, you are.
Know.
But I have friends in Washington, D.C., and I say, hey, man, go by the White House. Tell me, is anything going on there? And they're like, no, dude, the whole city is dead. There is no federal government, not in the way that we knew it to be. So there is the de-evolution in government that is happening right now. And that's another good tell, Joan, that the White Hats are winning this thing. But the CIA, who's really behind this pretendency, pretend presidency, had amassed so much power and so much wealth and so much ability to do false flags like this, that this is just, and I think this is what was referred to as the swamp. And it was just so much deeper and so many more creatures than anyone could imagine how difficult it would be to drain the swamp. And by the way, Washington, D.C. really was built on a swamp. And
yeah, literally.
Those creatures really do live there.
It is literal. They do live there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, we have a lot of work to do to keep people, over the next 8 years, because it's an 8-year kind of timeline and beyond, means we have a lot of work in keeping people positive, focused, like creating their own positive timelines to adapt in the midst of all that uncertainty and terror that is from the top down. So I do believe, by the way, my answer to you, Omar, is that this new administration is still part of that timeline too, as Brad is saying. That's the second timeline. It's the negative one. We want to see it shrinking. And when I do my visualizations on my talk, I see the ascension timeline, huge, mass awakening, and their timeline getting smaller and smaller. And, you can't believe the media either, because they're going to lie to us about that. And so we all have to go inside and trust this inner place to know.
That's why we have guys like Brad down here giving us the lowdown on what's really, really going on. Brad, I want to try to understand the Greta Treaty and how that all is connected to this looking glass.
Sure, and it's very important to understand history. And by the way, Voltaire, the great French philosopher, had a quote that said, history is the Mississippi of lies. It's always written by the winner. It's always manipulated. And you can't really believe everything you've heard in history, and a lot of that from World War II. And that's when a lot of things started really going bad. And that's, of course, right afterwards, the Nazi paperclip people were brought over into this country and started the CIA. I mean, really you can't not see it, basically, the influence that they have had in this country. And they have just gone rogue, okay? And when you go rogue and when you're dealing drugs and trafficking and all these nasty things, we've heard allegations against the CIA that this group is just out of control and they absolutely have to be taken down. but they have since moved to other countries. So they're really hard to get to. Plus, they're in the deep underground military bases. That's what a lot of these operations are doing, is taking out the deep underground military bases. So every time you see an anomalous location having an earthquake 10 kilometers down, that's the level of the underground bases. And do a fist pump when you hear that Dulce, New Mexico has had a earthquake 10 kilometers down, because that's the biggest and the most nasty. But that's where these timelines for future human hybrid ETs are taking place. So this is a very well insulated and protected underground base. But as it pertains to the CIA doing their dirty business, this spycraft, taking down governments, and boy, they've been doing this stuff for decades. Remember in South America, you had duly elected presidents in Argentina and Chile and other countries, that the CIA would go in there and install a fascist leader. And I do believe a lot of that has to do with many of the upper echelon Nazis escaping World War II. And I was down there 3 years ago. I was going to a lot of these places, including Bariloche, which is, and I've been to Germany many times, it was like stepping into a German enclave, right? And Hitler had a house, the Analco house, right there on the lake, just 5 miles away. I tried to explore it, but you can't get anywhere near it. But the point is, this is all part of the history that has just been kept from us, including the Greada Treaty. And to me, this is one of the most important moments in history, really, because it predicated so much that has gone wrong in the world. And that is, so the Greada Treaty was basically started in 1934 aboard a aircraft carrier in Panama. And it was the very first known meeting with extraterrestrials. And it was, the whole idea was we would exchange technology from the extraterrestrials in order to allow them to have domain in certain underground bases like Dulce. It wasn't known to the military at the time what a convoluted can of worms this was going to become, because these malevolent ETs are very treacherous, and they will lie, and they even have the ability to communicate telepathically, which we just have been so disadvantaged, not only with the technology, but with their abilities to manipulate humans. We have just been so incredibly disadvantaged. This is part of the reason why the Andromedians said, look, Earth needs help. They can't compete with this. They're just getting slaughtered out there. And we are. So this Greada Treaty ratifies every decade on the 4th year. And in the 1944, it was middle of World War II. Incidentally, happened to be the Bretton Woods Agreement, which set up the monetary system, which I think we can all see right now has been gamed for the elite's advantage just every step of the way. I mean, middle class is just being squeezed on every end, and sooner or later we're all going to be serfs to this great elite who wants to control all of us through this world government.
When you say ratified, Brad, like every 4 years?
4th year of every decade. So every 10 years. So it would be 34 to 44. 54 was with Eisenhower, and then he was at that point being talked to by benevolent ETs that said, don't get involved with these guys. They're bad news. But what we want you to do is get rid of your nukes, and we'll give you that technology, but you cannot be in the position to destroy the planet. Unfortunately, at that moment was at the high point of the Cold War, and Eisenhower made a terrible mistake. And look, Laura Eisenhower is a very friend of mine, and we've talked about this many times. In fact, CCC Publishing is going to be publishing her first books, and has told me that she wants to certainly set the record straight. And part of that is you can kind of understand where Eisenhower is coming from. Look, he just came out of World War II and saw the horrors of war and didn't want to take us into it, but felt like, hey, we need this technology and we need it now. So don't say you got to give up your technology for nuclear wars when the Russians have it and we can't have it. You can kind of understand where he's coming from.
Yes,
but
absolutely. I'd be afraid too to give it up. Like, okay, they would think he's crazy. They would have impeached him in a second. Yeah. Oh yes, the ETs told me to get rid of the nuclear weapons. I could see that would have gone over really well, right?
And then we feel like all the ETs were there are nannies. Oh, take care of us. Come down and clean up Fukushima and do everything for us. We're just these sloppy children, and we need your help. So now I can get to the Greada Treaty in 1964. Okay, so Kennedy had just been killed. They were looking at merging with the Soviets, doing a international space treaty, going into space, and the disclosure of all this was coming. So the technology exchange in 64 was quite different. It wasn't for 0-point energy or a better flying craft or this or that, but it was this thing. It was for the yellow cube. And the yellow cube, based on the technology very similar to the chronovisor, which was initially developed by a Benedictine monk in the Vatican named Ursetti, and he was working with different frequencies and finding a way to bring in different ways to measure these dates. And he was actually able to go back and see the Passion Play, the Crucifixion of Christ. Well, the assembled generals in the 64 Greada Treaty, they saw this thing, and it's a holographic image generator, which plays an exact replica of all events. Okay, and that's why I put in the middle there that if we could look at pre-Sans Egypt and what the pyramids were really built for and what their functionality could have been, we created that design for this book based on what I had heard. Each one of the pyramids had different special functions, and these were initiation chambers, by the way. They were used, not only could they generate energy, and even a pyramid, just a tiny little pyramid like this, does create an energy field coming off the top of it. If it can be measured, you can see it. And so the assembled generals in 64, they were asked, what event from history would you like to see? And being Christian men at the time, they said, we would like to see the final day of Christ. So they queued it up and played it. And apparently Jesus Christ was a real man and really terribly killed. And so this was amazing. And apparently there were films. They recorded the whole thing, but those films have not surfaced. But it made quite an impression upon these generals. Well, in 64, we're still in the Cold War. Now we're in the space race. And now we have this device, which can look back at any event in history with uncritical eyes. So, for example, if this technology were ever released and you and I would have it, we could queue it up on our phone, and this would be our little holographic generator. Okay, Dealey Plaza, Kennedy, 63, driving through. Where are all those bullets coming from? Oh, yeah, Dealey, Grassy Knoll, and over at the Dell Tax Building. So all conspiracies would be solved. We would just have no more question about what really happened if we were all able to access this technology. That's why it's so important that White House control this technology. Yeah, because you can game the system. And so in the middle of the Cold War, they took the yellow cube and that it became the provision of the Black Hats. And unfortunately, they had a darker agenda. They did want us to go into this World War III, destroy the planet. And the deeper they went and the more they kind of painted themselves in the corner, the more they needed to see it happen because their necks were on the line. If we ever to ever find out what they did using this technology, their goose is cooked, right?
So they kept going more and more.
Right. So they don't want us to even have access to it because we have all the algorithms, just like in the Twitter database, all those algorithms they're deleting.
Isn't there some president who also said the same thing, or I think it was a president, that if the public ever found out what we've been up to, they would. Who was that?
She
Bush
didn't make
Senior.
it to president. Okay.
Yeah.
It was that one. Oh my God. So, speaking of timelines, I overheard people a few years ago on George Noory talking about the Trump-Hillary scenario dating back to an era in the Bible, and where Trump had been king and Hillary had been commander, and that they had battled together in and out, going in and out of power for something like 40 years over those times. So it's an ancient battle. I have a quick question. Do you know about Dom and her, Brad?
Oh
And
yeah,
their
I've been
work
there.
with Oh, you've been there. Okay. So they
Gorgeous.
work with timelines.
Yep.
Did you ever meet Falco?
No, he had passed by the time I got there in 2004, but I did go down into what they call the temples of humanity. It's just amazing what they've done. And they built it on very potent ley lines right there in the Dolomite Alps, just a beautiful area right above Turin, which happens to be where the Shroud of Turin is kept.
Yes, and Falco said two things. He said that museum, the Egyptian Museum in Turin, is I think it's the largest outside of Egypt. And he said that they reincarnated. One of the reasons they picked Turin for Dom and her is that all those Egyptian souls were reincarnating back, attracted by their artifacts in the museum and coming back. But what interested me today that's relevant is Falco. So I met Falco earlier when he was alive.
Oh, wow.
I did several interviews with him. I'm going to have to go back and listen to them and
nice.
kind of. Yeah, no, I did interviews with him years and years ago, and he talked about the timelines. And he did say that one of their missions was to alter the timelines. And I asked him which timelines they had altered. And he said that at the time they had altered the war back in Iraq and Kuwait, and that they had literally stopped that further progression of that war. That's what he said. And then they had gone back on the timelines to Atlantis also. But curious if you have any thoughts about how that timeline has nothing to do with anything. I mean, that their timeline travel has nothing to do with this cube and looking glass technology. So there are other portals.
Well, you guys have heard of the Akashic records. There is a crystalline record of all events. There's supposedly, according to Edgar Casey, 3 receptacles. One is under the Great Pyramids in Giza, still there, still operable. The other one sank with Atlantis. It's on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. It is tied into the fire crystals, which were the energy source of Atlantis, which are still firing. And that is the anomaly of the Bermuda Triangle, which, by the way, is pilots flying in, missing time, coming out 20 or 40 years later, like the Philadelphia experiment, and ships going missing, same things. Clocks on the planes would be the time that they went in and not the time they came out. So a lot of anomalies with time. And I call it the looking glass technology. Well, it's not my term for it, but this is a big umbrella term for all the different devices and all the time travel possibilities, as well as these little artifacts that keep popping up too. But as far as Falco and the Gulf War, keep in mind that the very first thing our troops did when they got into Baghdad the second time, Bush Sr., he called it, he cut it short. He thought he was going to be able to win the war and catch Saddam and stop short of Baghdad. Big mistake, well, in their mind. That's why Bush Jr., once he got into Baghdad, the first thing they did was go to the museum, the antiquities department, and it's presumed that Saddam had found one of the Stargates in the ruins that he was digging up, the Uruk and Ur, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia. And they couldn't allow someone like Saddam to have this technology. And Stargates are also part of this looking glass technology. And they're quite ancient, too, that they have been around for quite a long time. And another one was found in Egypt. See if I can cue up the picture here real quick. Well, I have a picture of the Stargate in Egypt. I'll find it here in a second. So it's very interesting that the Guardians of the Looking Glass refer to the Stargate that Saddam had, and how important it was for our U.S. troops to get a hold of that before Saddam could change the timelines to his advantage. You know, the other thing is the Nazis had it too with this device called Die Glock, the bell. And the bell also had time travel properties.
Yeah, didn't it show up in Pennsylvania?
That's right. And again, it was this 40-year cycle, just like the Philadelphia experiments. The two brothers jumped off the boat. They showed up exactly 40 years to the minute after the Philadelphia experiment, but this time up in Montauk. And they were doing time experiments there too with the Montauk chair, which had a way to use your thoughts, project your thoughts, and create in a material way from them. So yeah, I mean, just the more that I look into this, and the more applications that I see, it just gets more and more interesting. And you got to know that the powers that be, because controlling the narrative is so vitally important to them, that they would find all this technology and all this information pertaining to it, as well as here's the Stargate.
What page are you on?
This is on page 340. And that's a picture of the Stargate they found in Egypt in 1898.
Is that connected somehow to that big chamber they found in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Okay, that is magnificent and huge. Guys, it's like
huge.
4 humans high. Huge. So there's also a war going on for these portals and these Stargate technology.
That's right.
And do we hear a lot about the white hats and the looking glass? So I understand that number 45 used the looking glass. You know, they use the looking glass also, which is kind of crazy, because if both sides are using the looking glass for the same event they're trying to do.
That's why it's the timeline wars. Yeah, that's why they're fighting each other to game each other up one step. But the white hats seem to be winning the war because we're preventing these false flags from happening, which predicate this timeline to World War III scenario, war with Russia or China or whoever else is going to be with. But you got to understand, I'm sure Russia and China both have this technology, and they may be part of the timeline wars too.
Oh my God. So number one, you're saying we can alter it, but number two, okay, it's so confusing, because if everyone's screwing around with it, what's the ultimate timeline? Does it revert back to the way it wanted to go in the beginning? I mean,
I was just thinking that, like, I wonder if 2030 is like somehow
right.
Singularity point. Yep. That's what. So both of these sides come back together, but they've gone through so many contortions, just like each and every one of us is going to go through on our timelines. Time is confusing to me now. I'm so confused about time. I need a PhD course in it. Not the technical.
There should be courses in this. You're right, Joan. We should have. We should be able to take advanced learning courses in timelines.
Because when I went to Dom and Her, I took a class on timelines too, and I knew nothing about it. They couldn't see a future past like 20. I don't know. There was a time Dom and Her, Falco came back because they couldn't see a future. So he came back to shift the timelines, but it was further out in the future. So that might mean we surpassed 2030. I think that something good that's good, like, okay, with Omar wanted to talk about Twitter, you know, and so the positive things that are happening, the advancement of free speech, which we're supposed to have.
That's right. Which shouldn't be happening.
You know, the return of a free media, the return of all these things can push us forward on that timeline. So no wonder I just read they're trying to restrict something like 42,000 supplements now. The FDA is just trying to restrict 42,000 supplements, take them off the market. And that's part of our timeline, though, the ability to take care of our health and be healthy.
Good point.
Brad, which page was that Stargate
Egyptian
on?
Stargate 340, I believe.
340.
You got to
And,
get the book, guys, so you can see
yeah.
the pictures. Oh,
Yeah,
you have
man, I don't want to
something.
waste anyone's time. I don't repeat myself from the other
Yeah.
esoteric books. I just want it to be really pertinent, good information, well written. I had a great editor that worked with me on all 3 books, and she was able to add material that she knew that related. So it's just trying to help people understand these very complex problems. But
Yeah.
what also needs to be said about the timelines and the white hats coming back is that that there was a Q drop in 2019 that mentioned Looking Glass.
Yes,
And
they
that
do. A
was,
few of them.
yeah, looking forward to look back, or paraphrasing there, which was very interesting that Q finally jumped in on it. So you mentioned the white hats, Joan, and how they're now using the technology here to game the system for the better. And so this Guardians of the Looking Glass, they just came on the scene, I think April 1st, this month even.
Right.
They're very
Last
new.
month.
Last month. And so the first event was picked to this New York event, which was for the most part averted. Next month, it's supposed to be an anthrax scare in Washington, D.C. The more people that know about it, the less likely it'll happen. And that's exactly what we want. Now, I'm sure there'll be skeptics out there saying, oh, well, these things don't happen, so how can you predict it? Well, we don't want them to happen. we want
Right.
a positive
We're not going to
outcome. And
argue.
a positive outcome is we're not doing this to ourselves anymore.
Right.
And
Because really, it's the directive of the problem, reaction, solution, right? It really all boils down to that, these false flag events, because when they do something and they give us that, they're looking for a reaction, and how the media plays into that. So if we give them the reaction they're wanting, and then there's a timeline kind of created there. So if we all become aware and know that what they're doing is a false event, then they're not going to get the reaction from us. That's the simplest I think I can.
Now,
I
you know
can
what's
try
interesting?
to understand it in my mind.
I agree. It is hard to understand this, but I think that as we talk about it, it's really good. I'm now thinking about other ways of altering timeline. We also have the Lockwood books. You know, the book, the 1895 produced the Travels of Baron.
Oh yes,
that's right. Baron Trout.
Travels written in 1895. And it's all about Baron Trump going off to Russia with his uncle, So.
And by the way, and I saw somebody in the comments section made mention of Donald Trump's uncle, who is working with Tesla to receive the Looking Glass technology through Tesla, who also was working on the Philadelphia experiment and didn't like the way it was going. And it's said that the first time they were using his devices to get this ship to have invisibility, Tesla himself was on site at the Philadelphia shipyards and pulled the plug. Said, humans aren't ready for this yet. Well, they got him out of the picture and they went ahead and did it anyways, to great peril to all the men who were on the USS Eldridge, because when it was going in and out of time through the dimensions, if somebody were walking up a steps during that period or going into another room, when they came back and they did shut it down prematurely again, and this is where things went wrong, some of the sailors were fused into the bulkhead and like half of their body was in the steps that they were on. And it was a huge tragedy. Every man who lived through the Philadelphia experiment was committed to a mental institution. One, they didn't want them talking, but two, it drove them crazy. They had no idea what they experienced.
Wow.
Yeah,
right.
that's
Without even
I do
having
get
the
into
details.
I do get into the Philadelphia experiment in much greater detail in Future Esoteric, this book. And Al Bielek and his brother Duncan Cameron, and because they were the two brothers that jumped off the ship. The reason they had different names is because they had to go back in time and put them into different families, and it created a tear in space and time. So they had to basically make changes in the lives that they would live. It's similar to the grandfather's paradox. If you jump through time like these two did, and now they're living 40 years in the future, there are consequences with what has happened in the past. That's why I think that's why Tesla saw the danger in all this and pulled the plug on it the first time they tried to do it. He just thought that the military was being very very uncareful in their experiment and what that would lead to, and he was absolutely right.
Right, before we close it off here, because hitting the hour marker, and I know you got some stuff to do. I'd like to hear more about that Greater Treaty, but I think I'm going to do a deep reading on that. You were mentioning, I think it was a talk that you were doing with Augie Noss, and you had mentioned something about the these areas in the States that you can't go for like hundreds of miles, and I found that a little interesting. Can you articulate that a little bit before we close it out, and maybe Dr. Joan has something?
Sure. Well, so I was saying this was pertaining to a lot of the people who had been abducted or some of the cattle mutilations, rather than just dropping the bodies into the farmer field on a winter's day with no footprints and branches underneath the body. Or there was a video that just surfaced recently. I guess they're still doing it, but in a limited way. In an indoor last winter, the cows are inside a barn, and bam, through the roof falls this cow, and kind of look, oh, what's that? And then just go back to eating. There's still evidence that they're still dropping these cows after they have been mutilated with laser precise instruments. Well, you can't do that with humans. And so some of the super soldiers who I've talked to that have been part of this secret space program, the great privilege and honor of being a moderator at some of the panels with these guys on it, and just both on and off the record telling me about how some of them were working with some of these abducted people, and perhaps they had to dispose of a body, that there were certain coordinates within our national parks that have these no-go zone areas. And a big one that I know of for sure is in Grand Canyon. And incidentally, it all has names like Osiris Butte and Isis Needle and Horus Plateau. And that is where the Kincaid expedition found Egyptian artifacts in 1933. And that story was on the cover of the Phoenix Gazette, the biggest newspaper in Phoenix at the time. And then, boom, it just went missing too. So that's part of Smithsonian Gate. It's another another interview we could do. But yeah, the Smithsonian has been largely responsible for altering our history and taking things like giant bones out of the record, just dumping them in the Atlantic, out of sight, out of mind.
Now that's a deep dive into the Smithsonian and what gives them the right to screw around with our history and lie so much. Because I've been doing a deep dive, I think, into Taria, and I'm going nuts now, going, oh my God, what in the world is time? And wow, this has been so fascinating, Brad.
Thank you.
Before you pique my, I don't want to keep you as more than I have to, Brad, but you kind of really piqued my interest here with the secret space program. And, I hear about like the 20 and back and 10 and back and 40 and back, things like that. How is all of that connected to like this looking glass? And are they actually using the looking glass to travel back and forth? Because the other day when we were talking to Frank Jacob, he was saying that they have these things, these J-rods that they insert into these devices, and then they can move through these devices like Stargates and end up in different timelines and different areas in the universe. Is that what the SSP is doing as well with these like 20 and backs with like what's his name, Emery Smith and Corey Good and guys like that.
Randy Kramer, James Rink, I know all these guys. And they're part of who gives me some of this information. Penny Bradley, she was with the German secret space program too, which is fascinating. There's many different secret space programs, but I think what Frank Jacob was talking about, this portal technology, similar to a Stargate, it is also looking glass technology because it's getting you from point A to point B without getting in a craft and flying there, but you are just basically being teletransported.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, something is at work here, something that is moving you from point A to point B. And that also can be along the time track of time and space. This goes into another deep dive into Einstein's equations about space and time, but that is another way of understanding how UFOs, including the Bell, can be also time machines. So every UFO is also a time machine, because once you get up to almost the speed of light, it's 9/10 the speed of light, then everything just becomes energy. And at that point, if you know where you're going, if you know how to navigate, you can go up and down the time track, past or future. But there are huge ramifications if you make any kind of mistakes. And I'll give you just one example, was in Billy Myers' contacts. He's a Swiss man who lost one of his arms in a farming accident. So they deemed him non-threatening, because a lot of these benevolent ETs, they look at us like the Planet of the Apes down here. This is a very dangerous place. So Billy thinks he was chosen because he wouldn't be able to strangle or really hurt them in the way another full-grown man would be. So he got all these incredible photographs. I'm sure you guys have seen them, really amazing photographs from the 50s and 60s and 70s. He's still alive and still in contact, I understand. But so there was this one picture where they showed a UFO near his property and this great big tree, and then the tree is not there. And they said, Billy, look, this is showing that you're faking this, because there's not the tree anymore and there's no signs it ever lived. So he had to go to the Pleiadians, where his contactees, and say, hey, what's the deal with that tree? Look, here it's in this photo and now it's gone. And they said, well, Billy, we actually had a little accident and we spilled something on the tree, and that was going to kill it. And so rather than allow it to die, we went back in time and unplanted it as a sapling, so it never existed. So you see the complexity of space and time now, that every little action has a reaction that can be very huge.
Wow. And that is mind-bending what you just said.
Can we go back and reset our own timelines?
Right.
Or
It's
can we go back?
Going on right now.
Right. Well, right. Okay. Well, I don't know what timeline we're going to see you again next time, Brad.
Wow, that was
an age timeline. Timeline 1, Joan, when all the angels are going to come out.
That's all I really wanted to know, was we're all going on timeline 1. So I can see the masses of humanity. Guys, do not be depressed over this. Be excited. Mm-hmm. You are being guided, led to I swear it's like the celestial realms where we're going. Well, if you compare it to the other side, yes. But I just feel it. And I want everyone to feel optimistic that all this information is coming out so we can be supported in where we're going. And I really
this kind of answers, and that Dr. Joan kind of answers the question that Terry Renner had. What about those of us working with timelines with our consciousness? Can we circumvent the machines? And by creating this timeline 1 of thinking about where we want humanity to be and what role do we want to play in that, and what ecosystem do we want to leave our grandchildren in, right? So if we think about that positiveness, then that's the real timeline that I want to be part of, and that's like timeline 1 from what I can see. But the whole idea about this whole looking glass theme for this week was to raise awareness, and to raise as much awareness as I possibly can. I had a memo sent to me by our friend Kathy Mason, and in it I seen some stuff about this looking glass, and I was like, hey, this is a great subject to talk about. They're asking us to raise awareness, so I have a platform, so I'm gonna do an entire week and try to raise as much awareness as I can to circumvent any type of false flag event that they might have with my own touch, I suppose, and just get the word out there. And it's working. There's a lot of people are watching, a lot of people are listening, and awareness is being raised. So the goal is really being met, and we're only halfway in, right? We're halfway in, and we still have a nice haul to go, because up until now, what have we done? We've done Frank Jacob, then we did Michael Feely, and today we did Brad Olsen, and we have Augie Noss coming up, and then we have Kiera Windrider coming up, and then we have Paul Wallace coming up, and then on Saturday we're going to conclude with this panel discussion. Unfortunately, Brad can't make, or sorry, Paul can't make it, because in Australia it's 2:00 in the morning. But who knows? He might decide to come, he might not, but it's really up to him. But this whole week is just, ongoing awareness into this looking glass, and how we can use our own consciousness, and how we can use our own social media platforms and YouTube channels and websites and mailing lists and what have you, to send the word out and remind everybody and that this is happening, and to keep an eye out for anything that may try to get a reaction from us, because that reaction they're looking for is always that lower emotional reaction which they're looking for. They're not working from the heart space like we are. So we have to keep that heart space in mind. And so with that, Dr. Joan, any final words? And then we'll get some parting words from Brad until our panel on Saturday. Really looking forward to that. That's going to be sick.
I'm really excited. I think today gave me even more optimism about where we're going. And, I think knowledge is power. And I think we can do it. I think we are growing in numbers, this Ascension, Awaken, Aware tribe. And I'm excited. So thank you for all the research you do, Brad. It's amazing on every subject. So thank you. And, I interviewed you years ago. I don't know if you remember it, but I actually interviewed you many years ago on Neil's platform on Portal to Ascension. I'm going to go find that. That's so funny. I'm really happy to see you here.
Yeah, I'm happy to see you guys. And thanks for having me join you today. It's been a great discussion. I just say, look, it's all hands on deck right now. For anybody who thinks that they can't don't play a role. Well, yes, you do. Your role is just to be aware, just to be conscious. So everybody is really needed at this point. And then this is building towards this great awakening. As we said at the beginning, I think we're all here voluntarily. We're here for the greatest mission that's ever taken place on planet Earth. And nothing short of the future of humanity is at stake. And I cannot understate how important it is this time from now till 2030 that really just thinking about these events and preventing them from happening just by being conscious and aware, as you said, Omar, the Hegelian dialectic, this problem, reaction, solution, we see through these false flags. They're not going to work anymore. And we are on the path to the golden age of humanity. And then we can all raise our glass and have a toast and say, hey, man, we came down here. It was a tough life living on Prison Planet, but we're going to shift it to 5D into a Prism Planet. And that will be a glorious day for future generations to set this in our mind and make it happen and to be aware. And so consciousness is everything.
Awesomeness. Thank you very much, Brad. That's beautiful. And thank you for your contribution into this week. You're epic, bro. Like I said earlier when we started, you're doing like 10 shows a day and 100 conferences a month. And you are like out there, man, just canceling everyone and everything that this cabal is, really built on. And I super appreciate that, because that's some total light work that you're doing. And guys, visit Brad's website, bradolsen.com, and then from there you can get resources to go to CCC Publishing and other resources that Brad has there. So this is the master site that I can send you to, instead of posting like 20 different sites and confuse you guys. So just go to one, Brad Olsen, and then from there you can click to go to the Esoteric series. You can go to CCC Publishing. You can find Brad Olsen on YouTube as well under the Esoteric series. It's a really cool playlist that I've watched and watch regularly, and I'll share that in the community as well. Really good information there. So thank you, Brad, and I look forward to seeing you on Saturday. And tomorrow we have with us Augie Nos to continue the Looking Glass saga for the rest of the week, and it's really exciting, learning lots about it, and hope you guys are enjoying it as well. And after we close this stream, please jump down below really quickly, leave a comment on the channel, an emoji or love or anything. It really helps the algorithm pick it up and serve this video to other people, because that's really what we want, is these videos to be served to other people so that they can watch it and raise their own awareness. And also subscribe, like, and love this channel and Dr. Jones' channel and Kathy Mason's channel, and send good vibes to Brad so that he can continue to bring us information and awareness. So my name is Omar, coming at you guys. Actually, that's Omar coming at you guys from West Coast, British Columbia, Canada, with my awesome co-host, Dr. Joan of Angels, from Joan of Angels, from California. We will see you guys tomorrow. Love you. Have a wonderful night. Don't forget
Love you all.
That's right. Don't forget to say you love yourself.
Love you all. And I'll see Brad on Saturday too.
Yep.
Right on, guys.
Sounds good, guys. See you Saturday.
Yeah, see you guys Saturday. See you tomorrow.